Hey everyone, hope you guys are having a great day. This was kind of a surprise live. When I say surprise, meaning that this morning I didn't know we'd be doing this, but we have an opportunity with two really phenomenal experts. And this is regard to Riley Strain, because there were some new updates that came out about Riley Strain. And so we're going to definitely delve into that. The first guest we have, you guys should already know if you've been on here, if you've been watching, it's Dan Catullo, who I'll bring on in a second. He outside his passion project, and he can talk to you about that a little bit more, is basically exposing fraternities, which is how we met. It was in Nashville right after Riley went missing. And he was down there because he's convinced that the fraternity had something to do with it. I don't disagree with him. And then the other expert we're going to have on, who is not yet arrived, but he should be here hopefully soon. But he is also, I'm blanking. I'm having a moment here. His name is David Easlick. And actually, funny enough, I saw him on the news yesterday before I made the Riley video, because he was on there talking about just this. And you want to talk about an expert. Dan knows him. He can tell you a little bit more. And when he gets here, he can tell you a little bit about himself. But he ran one of, if not the largest fraternity for a number of years, and now he exposes and helps sue them and helps get justice for the things that these fraternities do. So this is a really rare opportunity for what we have going on. Let me bring Dan on real quick, and we're going to skip the books. You guys know where the books are. You can go buy them if you want, but you can see it scrolling out the bottom. Let's bring Dan on. Hey there, how are you doing, man?
I'm good.
So we're still waiting on David.
Yep. I've been messaging him. I think he's on a hard time trying to figure StreamYard out, but hopefully he'll get on here in a minute.
Hopefully so. We can get him. It'll be, it's his first time using it, but we'll get him there. If not, we'll figure it out. So why don't you, so you've had a chance to look at the new data that came out, right? The new information regarding Riley, the 0.228 BAC. And I know this is not exactly related, but indirectly related. What was Adam's BAC, Adam Oakes' BAC, when he died?
He was almost 0.4.
Yeah. So not that. So if that gives you an idea,
remember, Adam died of alcohol intoxication. I think, didn't Riley die from drowning? He was drunk.
I think so. Yeah.
But I think he died of drowning though. So the alcohol may have caused him to fall in the river or whatever. But I don't think he died from alcohol poisoning, right?
No, he didn't. And David just got in, so that's awesome. No, he didn't die from alcohol poisoning. He fell in. But my point was to show how high his number was, how it wasn't really terribly far from where Adams was, and significantly more than the legal limit of 0.08. And David just got here, so we already kind of introduced him a little bit, but let me bring him on.
Yeah, let's bring David in.
Hi.
Hey, David, how are you doing? Thanks for coming on and joining us. I saw you on the news yesterday, I believe.
Well, thank you. I hit 100 stations, I think.
Yeah, it was I live in Nashville, so it was Channel 4 here.
Yeah, it was the Gray Investigate TV, and they have quite a service. But anyway,
I was telling them a little bit about you. Why don't you kind of introduce you? Dan's been on the show before, but why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, David.
Hey, hi, Dan. I basically, I ran Deke Fraternity, Delta Kappa Epsilon Fraternity from about 80 until I retired in 2010. And during that period, I changed the fraternity from 20 chapters to 55 chapters, and I was involved in all the interfraternal risk management type stuff. What happened was, fraternities right after Animal House developed this need to, shall we say, destroy fraternity property and really join for all the wrong reasons. And the fraternities decided to try to get some insurance. And in order to get some insurance, they had to go to a insurance company and say, we will behave in every fraternity chapter and every fraternity person, and we will govern to make sure that that happens. And so they set up this risk management program, which was called FIPG, which was 10 basic anti-booze type things, but they were all linked to hazing and linked to parties and linked to whatever. And what happened was they took this code and applied it to every fraternity chapter, and then started billing every fraternity chapter, every fraternity individual, $250 to $500 a year for insurance. But the problem was, when they billed the undergraduates for insurance, they only insured the national. So the undergraduates were paying $250 to $500 for nothing, and they thought they had insurance and they didn't. And so what happened was the fraternity, the national fraternities, actually billed about double what the insurance cost, and the balance they used to basically pad their salaries and add personnel and do things on a national basis. So now you're in a situation where the fraternities basically are claiming that no longer does FIPG apply, but they're still billing this $500, and that their risk management code is advisory and educational, so that these kids are supposed to learn by getting sued and learn by having fatalities and various other things, and this is nice educational material, and they're to learn from it. Meanwhile, the national has $2 or $3 million worth of insurance and $2 or $3 million worth of profit from the undergraduate insurance money. So that has been something that I have found to be grossly unfair. And having been in the fraternity movement for so many years, I basically have been volunteering, I guess, originally volunteering. I mean, I don't get paid for it, but I'm an expert witness in hazing and various other miscreant type cases. And I work with lawyers. I mean, I am a lawyer, but I don't try cases. I basically work with attorneys, and they hire me as an expert witness or consultant. And that's basically what I've been doing for the last 7 years, and I've tried 61 cases as of today.
Out of curiosity, what made you decide to go from running a fraternity at the national level to helping to expose and basically become an advocate, against them?
Well, basically, it isn't against them. It's try to reform them and try to get them, to do the right thing. What happened was we had a case Deke did at the University of Washington, where a kid committed suicide after being hazed nearly to death by a Canadian chapter who came down to what was a new chapter at the University of Washington and hazed the hell out of them. And I, basically then attempted to get Deke to expel the Canadian chapters, or at least, separate them to another entity, because it cost us $1 million in the final lawsuit that came about, and to reform. And we joined a thing called FRMT, which was this offshore insurance company that was put together by the various nationals, in which Delta Chi, interestingly, was a absolute leader and proponent of. And I was trying to get them to adopt a risk management code and mean it, and it just happened that a board member was a Canadian judge, and I think I lasted about a week after I suggested that. So I was unemployed, and then I learned about a case at Rutgers where a 17-year-old girl survived 17 minutes after going into the deke house there, and I knew a good deal about the deke house at Rutgers, and I called the lawyer who was representing that and said, I've got some information for you. And he suggested, after that trial was over, he said, you really ought to be an expert witness. And I basically said, what's that? And about a day later, I got my first engagement, and I've been doing this full time ever since.
Well, that's obviously pretty impressive. So we're here obviously to talk about the Riley Strain case, and how did you follow that from the very beginning?
Yes, I did. And I was wondering, the thing was, I looked at it and I thought, God, there's, this can't be a real case. This is, this position that this kid suddenly, fell in the water, and, he didn't have any alcohol and he didn't do anything wrong, and nobody had anything to do with it, and nobody knew where he was and all this other stuff. It didn't make any sense. And it was funny when I got a call from the fellow at what WSMJ or WS what was the
I think WSMV.
WSMB, and he gave me copies of the police reports and the various autopsy reports and the fact that the blood alcohol level that this kid had, it was 2.88 or something, and that he had been served on this bus coming down from the University of Missouri, despite the fact that the bus driver obviously lied and said he wasn't. And these kids knew that the kid was totally messed up, and the kid had a history of, once he had alcohol, he got, unconscious. And so this really said to me, man, the National is in trouble here, and they really ought to be the one that's getting sued. And I don't know what the Strain family is doing about it, but boy, they have got one hell of a lawsuit here.
So David, I was there when we were looking for him. That's how I met Justin. I happened to be in Nashville, so I'm like, okay, a fraternity kid's missing. Once I heard it was Delta Chi, I immediately ran down there because, as you know, from being interviewed for my film, I'm covering the Adam Oakes case. So I'm really intrigued what's going on with Delta Chi. And I was shocked. Once I got down to the scene, there were tons of people looking for Riley. The Cajun Navy was there. There were volunteers. Not one Delta Chi. So right off the bat, when I didn't see any Delta Chi's looking for him, I immediately went on their socials, and then they weren't even posting about him on socials. My alarm bells went off like crazy. I'm like, okay, this is typical what we see when they are culpable. This type of behavior we've seen in the past with other hazing incidents or any other nefarious activity where they try to cover stuff up. When they act like that, normally, and you can help back this up, that means they have some sort of hand in it, or they know something, or they're scared. If this was just merely an accident and a brother went and fell in the river, I really believe that every Delta Chi on the planet would have been there looking for him. The fact that they ran for the hills and they went silent, to me, says it all, especially knowing what I know about Delta Chi.
Yeah, well, Dan, the National Crisis Management Policy says specifically that you absolutely shut up and don't make any statement to the press or anybody else, and you don't contact the parents, interestingly enough. And so they're just reciting the national policy of what to do in the case of an emergency like this. And, they absolutely are following from the headquarters what they are supposed to do. And,
isn't that a kind of against brotherhood, though? You would think.
Absolutely.
But when every minute counts, if someone could be in trouble or distressed or injured somewhere, don't you think the brotherhood should have been out there looking for him?
Oh, absolutely. But this is all given to them by their insurance lawyers. And they have these incredible insurance lawyers called from the Coconos firm in San Francisco and Austin, Texas. But they're cutthroat trial attorneys, and they basically have said that the National can't control the day-to-day operations of the fraternity, so therefore they're never going to be liable. And boy, then they've got a couple of cases that have said that, and my job full time lately is trying to rebut that, and we've been successful in a number of cases. And boy, I think the college is liable. I think the bus driver is liable. I think the bus company is liable. I think the National is liable, and the undergraduates are liable. But the undergraduates, basically they're left without any insurance, and the only place the lawyer can go is after their homeowners insurance policies, which is what usually happens. I mean, I shouldn't be talking strictly of insurance, but I mean, this is the absolute reason that the Nationals have done this. I mean, they, as a National, sit there and say, we have this wonderful risk management plan, and the North American Interfraternity Conference says they do too, and all they get all these foundations to go along with them, but what they're really doing in lawsuits is absolutely different.
They try to point fingers and act like they don't have anything to do with it. But now that we know that the drinking started on the bus, that was an organized and official fraternity event. So
they really had no business planning an event in Nashville, for crying out loud. They're in Missouri. I mean, there needs to be some sort of regulation. You've got basically these fraternities are run by 18 and 19-year-old kids. nobody who's 21 in the fraternity has anything to do with the fraternity and leadership. They're off, living in apartments with their girlfriends. Anybody who's actually in the fraternity house isn't even old enough to buy booze, but they somehow, it's totally wrong, the situation. It's basically a bunch of blind pigs run by, high school graduates.
It's interesting. It seems to go in waves where we see fraternities have little streaks. We had a Pike streak. We had ATO a couple years ago, then Pike. Seems like Delta Chi is in the press a lot lately.
Only because of the Adam Oaks case, and that's a beautiful case, and that's going to end up with a multi-million-dollar judgment, I have a feeling. But they actually got the school to kick in some money too, which is increasingly the schools are finding that they're liable and they're contributing to the judgments, and that happened in the Gruber case and in the Piazza case, and now it happened in the Oaks case. And as the schools see this happening, I think that's where you're going to get efficient regulation of fraternities and actually maybe have a wind change where they're banned. I don't know.
Well, I mean, just to be very clear, I am identical as Dave. Both Dave and I enjoyed our college years and fraternity years, and neither of us are necessarily anti-Greek. We're just anti-bullshit. We don't want kids dying. We don't want people torturing people or killing people. That's it. Not a lot to ask for. I mean, but the stuff that's been going on out there lately, it's just drastically different than it was 20, 30 years ago. And it's getting worse, and no one is doing anything really to stop it.
50 years ago, I remember rolling around in some molasses and other things, and going out and singing a few obscene songs. And that was sort of the end of it. And congratulations, you're a geek. But this stuff, I mean, the thing is, alcohol was never involved on behalf of the undergraduates. Now this whole, taking the pledge class and having them chug huge amounts of alcohol is what's destroying the fraternity system. I have a feeling.
Someone asked, how did they know they were drinking on the bus? I think the police interviewed a lot of the fellow brothers and they admitted to it, and the bus driver as well, right?
Well, the bus driver claims he didn't know anything about it. But the kids admitted that. Now, I got all these statements from the press, and I basically reviewed them, and they said that they had evidence from the undergraduates they were drinking on the bus, and apparently the Strain kid had 2 vodka shots and 3 IP. What is it?
IPA beers.
IPA bottles on the bus.
But I think in the police report also it did say 12 to 15 drinks they think he had before getting to Luke Bryan's.
Yeah, I think that arrived before and after, but they claim that actually they have testimony that on the bus the kid had the 2 vodka shots.
Wait, do you see this? You see Diana's question, Dave? So it says, what advice would you give to a mom like me with a kid that might join a frat next year? How can we make sure he's safe?
I would tell him that there's no way he should be joining a fraternity. The way the fraternity system is now, it is just absolutely out of control. You've got these, the more successful the fraternity and the more popular the fraternity, the more booze and the more drugs, the more absolute. Oh, if he's going to a larger school in Texas, get away, please. Don't join a fraternity.
Yeah, I mean, just so you guys know,
I've had
there's not one. You can't point out one national fraternity, not one that hasn't had a hazing incident. Yeah. They all do it, and they all make a big deal about it on their website that they have anti-hazing policies and they're anti-hazing, but it happens everywhere. Everywhere.
Yeah, their anti-hazing policies advisory. Isn't that interesting?
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because when we look at Delta Chi's website, and by the way, I was Greek life too, so I was a TEAC, Tau Kappa Epsilon at Georgia Southern, and I didn't do it for the full time. I kind of realized, which I know Dan said I should ask you about this, and I think we should definitely touch on it. I left because I felt that the concept of brotherhood that they were offering was just BS. You really didn't feel it. You know, since you did this for a long time, you probably will recognize what I'm going to say here, but there were certain members that they wanted there because they wanted there. And then there were certain members they wanted there because they know that those members would pay their dues on time. And I was in the latter of that group. At least that's how I was made to feel. So But when you were looking at the Delta Chi website and what even WSMV had said, they showed from the fall 2023 parent webinar, to try to make these parents feel good about this decision. It's like, hey, if they have anything over 15% alcohol volume, that's the most that they can have, unless there's a third party, a licensed third party, which I'm guessing that's obviously liability purposes. If not, they're going to be on probation. They're going to have corrective action. And it seems to me that that's just blowing smoke to try to appease the parents. What are your thoughts on that?
Exactly. The 15% thing is part of there's a new 10 item risk management code that the North American Interfraternity Conference has adopted to replace what used to be the risk management code that all the fraternities belonged to, which was the FIBG code, and they were enforcing it. And what happened was in 2019, I think basically because they were getting sued too often and they were finding themselves, in judgment territory, they got rid of the FIPG code, and the North American Interfraternity Conference came in, and they came up with this new plan. And I don't know where they dug up this 15% thing, but I mean, I guess that was so that they could drink, I don't know, malt liquor. But I mean, you can't, it's absolutely ignored. It's ridiculous. And every fraternity chapter, they just pour, vodka into garbage cans and then pour out a little fruit juice and start serving it. I mean, that's this 15% thing.
But pointing stuff out like that, what they're doing is covering their ass. So if they get sued, they can act like, well, look, we put it on our website. It's part of our policy. We're anti this, but they don't do shit to stop it. I mean, really, I was talking to Eric Oakes last night, and he was catching me up after the Ohio Hazing Summit, and I've focused more of my education now. I'm going after the drug lords. I'm focusing everything on the people at the top, people who used to be in Dave's position, because this isn't curing cancer. Literally, like, if the fraternities want this shit to stop, they can stop it. I mean, they could have zero tolerance. They could just clamp down on this and end this. And the universities will probably be happy about that. But instead, they turn a blind eye, and then they do things to all smoke and mirrors, and they make it about the kids, and they try to take liability off their own back. I mean, and then terrifying things happen, like what happened last week in the Wyan case in Ohio. A judge actually dismissed the case. Now they're appealing it, but the judge's ruling was that as long that a university can't be held liable as long as they're attempting to educate or take corrective measures, which is just bullshit. So basically, they're telling anybody that as long as you put things like on your website, like, hey, we don't tolerate hazing or drinking, and then they do it, then they're covered. But
the other thing is they know absolutely which are the bad chapters. I mean, the thing is,
all the time,
these guys, they've got as their staff are recent graduates who've been out of school a year or two, and these are kids who've gone to conventions, and at the conventions, all these kids learn is different ways of hazing and how to get around the basic rules. But they know who the bad people are. I mean, if I had a hazing case, I knew it was coming from LSU or Yale or Center College, because I had been in the job for 20 some odd years, and then where the bad actors are, because you go around and you travel and and they aren't taking action. They're not getting rid of these people before something like this happens. I mean, it's absurd that they claim that this is a surprise, and this is somehow in violation of this risk management code that's utterly unenforceable, and they don't really care to enforce it anyway.
Cheryl asked Dave, do you follow issues at sororities as well?
Only when it comes up. I basically every morning search Google for what the press has got out there, and I post those on. I've got a group on Facebook, which is Fraternity Horror Stories and Actions Taken to Stop Them, and anybody who wants to join that can join it for no. I mean, there's no requirement to join, but I post every article that I get, and if a sorority comes up, yes, I'll post it. But by and large, it's the fraternities. The sororities are governed by strong women who don't let these kind of things happen, and they make the girls have no alcohol at the houses, so they go to the fraternity houses and tear the hell out of them.
Yeah, and some sororities, like I'll give you guys a good example. I was in a homecoming parade at my alma mater at WVU, and I was on the Delta Gamma float, and I went up to the Delta Gamma house after it, and I mean, it was like trying to get into the White House. I had to wait at the front door. They had to come out. They had to scan my driver's license, and then the house mother walked me into the living room, and then we couldn't leave the living room area. Very, very stringent on rules on how they run sorority houses, and there's always an adult there that's responsible for the girls. When there is an adult present at some of these fraternity houses, like in the case of Gary Diversley Jr. at Rider University, the boy who was the supposed to be the house father or whatever, the housemaster, he was basically a brother. He was an alumnus. I mean, it was young, and so, I mean, does anybody think in a million years that one of their own is going to rat out their own fraternity? So his job was to inform Ryder if anything nefarious is going on at the fraternity, and of course, he never reported anything because he's not going to rat his own brothers out. So, I mean, they need a neutral party in there to trust somebody. You can't put 50, 18 to 21-year-old boys together in a room, in a house, and think nothing bad's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, what they try to do is they have the IFC, which is the group of the fraternities on campus, supposedly policing in these parties, and supposedly going out and in patrols and making sure that things aren't violated and then the other things aren't violated. And interestingly enough, the North American Interfraternity Conference just recently provided a $2 million insurance policy for the IFCs to protect them from this sort of stuff, to basically encourage them to continue in their little gamesmanship of going around and checking to make sure fraternities aren't doing something wrong.
Judy, the lawyer, asked, would you sue the fraternity in Missouri or the bar in Nashville, or both? I don't think the bar, just so you guys know, I'm very familiar with how Broadway works. One of my partners owns a big bar down there. But if you look at the way they handled it, the footage that they submitted to the press and to the police, I mean, they handled it beautifully. They clued in that he had too much to drink. They escorted him out. They weren't rough with him. They have everything on camera. They didn't overserve him. They only gave him one drink, and they realized he was intoxicated, so they brought him outside.
I think the bar is going to get out. But I mean, I think if you want to know who I would sue, I'd sue the college, I'd sue the bus company, I'd sue the bus driver, I would sue every member of the fraternity, and particularly every officer, and I would sue the National.
Spoken like a true lawyer.
I mean, my experience is if you want to collect and you want to get their attention, you got to sue them all.
Yeah.
Real quick, because I know people are asking, so I'll give the updates on Riley Strain. For some, if you're on here and you don't know the story about Riley Strain, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but the nuts and bolts of it is he was 22, right? Or 21 or 22, doesn't matter.
22, yes.
22, okay. From University of Missouri, he was part of Delta Chi, and they were coming from Mizzou to Nashville for a fraternity formal. What we learned yesterday is apparently from the police records, two of the brothers stated that Riley and other brothers were drinking on the bus, despite the fact that the bus had a strict no drinking policy. Allegedly, the bus driver was trying to force that, but failed. I mean, look, I'm just going to say this, and you can correct me, David, because obviously you'll know more than me, or Dan. If he's trying to enforce a no drinking policy and people are drinking, why not just pull the bus over and say, like, as long as you're doing this, we're not moving? That to me would have been a way to enforce it, but that's just me. But then as far as the other things go, we learned that he had a 0.228.
First of all, even for the bus driver, don't underestimate the power of peer pressure with these fraternities. I mean, remember, they're groomed from the time their pledge is on. And I know a lot of people that say, oh, I'm a strong person. No one's going to tell me what to do. No one's going to bully me. But if you look at some of the most recent hazing victims, from Tim Piazza, even Gary Diversley, like a lot of these, Stone Foltz, a lot of these kids were very popular kids. They're not weak individuals. They're not people that were easy to take advantage of. They are great at grooming you and then not only sucking you in, but also making you bow down to them and succumb to things that you never would normally do. And so when you have a group of 40 or 50 boys, I don't know, I don't know if even if you're a lineman on the Chicago Bears, I don't know if it's that easy as to pull the bus over and say, stop it. They can be intimidating. I mean, fraternities these days have changed. I've suggested, I've consulted with lawyers that I think someone should go after them under a RICO claim because they act like criminal enterprises. They are gangs now. They act more like gangs than brotherhoods. This is not a club. This is a gang, and they act like it. We saw it recently. They were being heralded with the American flag thing, recently, and that was a patriotic thing to do, but they were almost acting gang-like. I mean, they were interrupting people who were protesting, and I'm not taking sides there. I'm just saying fraternities act a certain way where their entire modus operandi is intimidation and bullying. So it's hard for anybody to stand up for them. Their own alumni can't stand up to them. They created a system that now is just completely out of control. It's the prisoners run the prison, and somehow they have to interrupt that system to try to make it better. I think without a complete shutdown and a complete rebuild, I don't know how Greek life can ever be saved, to be honest with you, because these kids learn these skills to act a certain way. I mean, when I did 45 Mill Street, when I worked with the Wyant family, their son turned into a totally different person in a matter of 6 weeks, to the point where they didn't even recognize him. They were completely alarmed. He acted different. They groomed him with drugs. They were feeding him drugs. His own girlfriend was like, I don't know who this person is anymore. And I've heard that from countless families. They are very, very good at controlling these types of situations. So, the bus company should be sued, but I kind of feel bad for the bus driver. It's hard to be in those situations.
I think these social bus companies, I mean, if you get a charter bus, so there's going to be booze on that bus, whether it's a bunch of adults or a bunch of fraternity kids. I mean, I would think that 90% of what he transports is a bunch of people getting drunk, going to a football game or going wherever. I don't, I think he's just lying to try to save his ass. If you want to,
he might have turned a blind eye and just let the kids be kids, but
right.
But if he was in a position to try to stop it, I don't know how those kids would have reacted. Right. You would think that, like we're all used in high school, the bus driver yells at the kids and kids back off. I don't know if a bunch of drunk Delta Chi's would have backed off.
I don't think a bunch of drunk kids, drunk college kids would ever back off, but whatever.
So Lisa,
I'm sorry. The problem basically is the hazing of some of these kids are going through. The Marine Corps ought to learn how to haze from these kids. I mean, the hazing that these kids are experiencing. The getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, the running, the runs, the alcohol, the drugs, and the drugs, particularly at some of these amazingly great schools. I mean, name schools that you would expect people were going to go to and become justices of the Supreme Court or something. The drugs that are involved in the hazing and the alcohol involved with it, it's shocking. And I read all these transcripts, and they basically all have the same story where they didn't do a damn thing, and then you find out that my God, they put the Marine Corps to shame.
It's funny about the drug stuff, or even just everything in general. The typical reaction, the answer of all fraternities is we don't know what's going on. We don't babysit these things. And the funny thing is, there's security cameras in almost every fraternity house. So if they're not aware of what's going on, then who the hell is watching the cameras, or are they even bothering watching it? We know they know what's going on, but they try to. They just turn a blind eye and they play stupid.
Well, that's the thing. These are all now $1 million corporations or multi-million-dollar corporations because they're basically raping the kids on keeping the money from the insurance policies, and they're controlling all these animal houses that are sitting out there on campus, and they're not supervising them. They're saying that they can't supervise them because they can't control the day-to-day operation. Well, if they can't control the day-to-day operation, why in the hell are they there?
By the way, Justin, what was that question you had up a minute ago that we didn't ask her? Do any school officials go with the fraternities on these trips, or is it just the students?
It's just the students.
Yeah, they wouldn't dare because they know what's going to go on those trips. So a lot of times, depending on what it is, they maybe might meet them in places, but the officials from the fraternities they magically disappear when they know nefarious stuff is about to happen. Like in the Adam Oaks case, there was a fraternity advisor, an alumnus that was the advisor for the chapter. He actually attended a meeting just prior to they did the Big Little ceremony, and he knew the Big Little ceremony was about to happen, but he magically disappeared just as the ceremony was about to start.
Well, their lawyers are telling them not to do anything with the fraternities. I mean, their lawyers, they got rid of the in loco parens, and the lawyers are saying get as far away as you can from undergraduate involvement.
So this is a good one. Judy, the lawyer, said, would you deem a fraternity? Would you deem the fraternity social host in terms of liability? And if so, is the liability for the overserved and underserved of underage? I mean, first of all, if your kid's in a fraternity, that's, you have to be careful enough, but I would never recommend anybody be an officer of any sort, especially the social host, because if something ever happens at a party, your kid's going down. Because if you were in charge of organizing that party and underage people were served, you're really in deep doo-doo. But of course, if you're the socialist and anybody gets served or overserved, whether they're underage or or of age, you're going to be held liable. I don't know if Dave agrees with that.
Oh yeah, well they're basically they're providing alcohol from the fraternity. I mean, basically the liability is to the fraternity.
Well, this is a go. Hey, Dave, I would love to know, would you sue in the Riley Strain case? If you were the lawyer, would you file the lawsuit in Tennessee or in Missouri?
I'm afraid that as a Michigan lawyer, I have no idea.
You probably think as if the fraternity is based in Missouri and that's where this event was organized. I don't know. There
are a number of places you could file that lawsuit. You could file it in Indianapolis, Indiana, where
the headquarters are.
The headquarters are. I mean, I'd file it wherever the best law was.
Why are most of the fraternities headquartered in Indianapolis? Is that because of liability, like the way banks go to Delaware?
Teak got together in 1980 something and convinced everybody to move to Indianapolis because they didn't charge property taxes on fraternity type headquarters. So they all built their headquarters there.
Venus asked, does what Riley was drinking make someone aggressive? I mean, there was beer.
Vodka.
The vodka, I mean, depends on how he handles his alcohol, I guess. I'm not sure. An interesting thing, I got a lot of criticism from some people when I was ranting and raving about the fraternity. If anything, I think fraternities today should all be sued for fraud because it's a false advertising. What you think you're joining and what your parents are sold to what they believe that you're joining is farthest thing from the truth. They should just be honest that these are glorified drinking clubs. There's no such thing as brotherhood anymore. Because, the second something goes wrong, your brothers are gone. I mean, in the Adam Oaks case, Jason, the president of the fraternity, used to speak to someone at National almost on a daily basis. And then when Adam died, he called National and they didn't even want to talk to him about it. They didn't want to give him any advice. They basically told him to take down all the websites and social media, take out social media down immediately. And from this point forward, Delta Kappa ceased to exist at VCU.
That's where's the crisis management national.
Yeah, where's the brotherhood when you need them the most? And exactly. The most fascinating part that I learned from Dave, that Dave's become an expert on, he kind of cracked the code. Well, number one, it's very hard to discredit Dave. There's an old saying that you can't bullshit a bullshitter. Well, he was once in the height of this. And if anybody knows anything about DEAC is a smaller fraternity, but they're one of the most prestigious. There were multiple U.S. presidents that were DEAC. DEAC is a very hard chapter a fraternity to get into. It's a lot of influential people were DEAC. A lot of current senators and congressmen were DEAC. But they created a system that they could just willy-nilly run this any way they want, and somehow they protected themselves because when they were having issues many years ago and insurance companies want to insure them, now they basically all self-insure. And on a crazy twist to this whole thing of self-insuring, believe it or not, some fraternities are profiting off some of these kids' deaths, because when a kid dies, they can raise the rates on their own insurance policies and profit off their members, which is just freaking crazy when you think about it.
Well, there are only two insurance companies, and basically one of them is owned by 8 fraternities, and that's owned by Sigma Chi, SIE, Teak, and a few others. But I mean, it's amazing the level of, when I left Deke fraternity, we were having a hard time, paying salaries and doing anything, but we hadn't discovered the fact that you can charge the kids this outrageous amount of money for the risk management fees, and now they're all carrying millions of dollars worth of assets in their balance sheets.
And to show that they don't care about their members, I don't know if anybody has like a family policies, or like if you get an automobile insurance policy. I mean, obviously, if someone has DUIs or something, it's different. But sometimes when you have insurance, like for example, I have a production liability package through my production company. When I need to name an additional insured on something, sometimes it doesn't cost anything. Sometimes it's a couple dollars. So when these fraternities get these big policies, and the funny thing is they're charging their members a monthly fee. Part of the dues is part of that money goes to pay the insurance policy. But to add the actual members as additional insureds under that policy wouldn't even cost that much. We're talking like $5, $10 a month, not even a lot of extra money. And I'm sure if these kids knew that for an extra $10 a month, they'd be included in the insurance policy, I'm sure they would gladly pay the $10. They purposely exclude them and keep them out. They only cover the people at the main office.
The only insurance in those policies is on the national. And that's the crazy thing, because, if your son is in a chapter, say in this chapter at Missouri, where the Delta Chi, and you have not yet heard from a lawyer yet, you will be sued for your homeowner's policy if you're a parent. So you just get ready, because that's the only coverage, and that's where the lawyers go first, because you go after each one of these undergraduates and say individually, you had knowledge of this, and we want to sue the homeowner's policy, and that's where they get their first money, and that's where they get their first collection, and that's because the national has set this mess up where they're making millions of dollars off insuring the undergraduates.
So just so everybody knows, even though your son may be over 18, if he goes to college and joins a fraternity and something happens, you will get sued.
Oh, absolutely.
So let me ask you in regard to Riley Strain in particular. So they get to Nashville. He's removed from the bar. It came out in the police reports or from the Tennessee Alcoholic Beverage Commission that they believe that he was not overserved at the bar. So I guess my first part of this question is, what does that do as far as liability from the bar? Would that hold up? And then the other part of the question is, one of the things that has really kind of stuck out to me is the fact that they didn't report him missing for 12 hours afterwards, but 2, Dan and I looked for Riley longer than any one of his fraternity brothers did. Now, I did have somebody reach out in the height of this to me, said, a girl who had gone down there with them. I don't know if she was girlfriend, sorority, whatever, kind of jumping on me saying like, we searched for that first night for several hours. I mean, we didn't see any footage of that, but whatever. But that means you search for one night for a couple hours, and then you just get on the bus and go home. Do you feel like that was more of a lack of brotherhood, or more the fraternity, at the national level telling them to get on the bus and get the hell out of there?
I assume it was fraternity at the national level, because if you read their crisis management plan, and it's a paragraph which basically says you will not involve parents, you will not do this, you will not do anything, and you will not testify, and you will get the hell out of there. I mean, that's basically the risk management, crisis management policy of the national. I would say that's where the national is at fault.
But Justin, even though the bar didn't only serve them one drink, where I think they're culpable, and I'm not an attorney, but it seems to me the one area where they're culpable is that if he did show up there having 12 to 15 drinks already, and he was visibly intoxicated, they should not have let him in to begin with, much less served him one drink. So that's the one area where the Strain's lawyer could really nail Luke Bryan's bar, because they're not supposed to even allow an intoxicated person in the premises. Now, they did do a good job of removing him from the premises. But, I think from the footage you could see there were indications that he was, intoxicated as he got there. So they probably should not have let him in. So that's where they're going to probably nail him.
That's true. But I mean, I saw also there were a number of videos where he did not look intoxicated when he was at the bar. So I don't, I'm sure that would be their defense.
Well, but when he was leaving the bar, I mean, it was only minutes later. I mean, we didn't, obviously no one's watched all the footage, but he was clearly intoxicated going down the stars.
Right.
I mean,
and we know, well, from last we heard, and when the Riley's family kind of got very quiet, was after news broke that they had retained Morgan & Morgan. And let's be real, Morgan & Morgan is they're a massive law firm of essentially ambulance chasers, and they only take cases for the most part that are slam dunks that are going to have big payouts. So obviously they know something that whether we know it or not, but it seems to me that they wouldn't take that case unless they were.
Sure. One thing I want to be clear about the problem about fraternities, one of the things we're focusing on my movie that I think we're trying to get stats on this, but we're close. But like the average settlement in like a wrongful death case for like a vehicular manslaughter case is like $9 million. The average settlement in like a fraternity hazing death is, 2 million, 3 million. I mean, a slam dunk case, in your opinion, what you're saying, believe it or not, even though you might sue 35, 40 people, a lot of times they settle for the policy maximums. That's what these lawyers do. I mean, and a lot of time the maximums on homeowners policies is 100,000 or 50,000 or 250,000. So you get a lot of $50,000 to $100,000 checks. And then this is the real irony of it, which I'd love to hear Dave's thoughts. They settle for the maximum policy amount that the fraternity has, but the fraternity's fucking self-insuring. So they say, well, our maximum policy is $1 million. Well, that's an amount that's something you determined. You guys are self-insuring. And the crazy thing is the fraternities never feel the pain because they don't write a check. Their insurance company writes the check, which they own. They raise the policy, so they end up profiting off this. But they don't ever have to write a check. So until a fraternity has to write a check, you're never going to see change because it's just, okay, another kid died. We paid $1 million to the family. The ones that we, and I could argue with you that this is premeditated. They knew what's happening. The fact that no one's ever stuck it to a fraternity and gotten $100 million judgment is just mind-boggling to me. The judgments aren't nearly as big as you guys think. And then the lawyers get a third of it, plus they get their expenses. So even if you get $4, $5, $6 million, the family gets $1.5 million to $2, $3 million at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, the problem is these cases don't get tried, and basically the parents decide after years of litigation to give up and take the settlement. And because if these cases ever went to trial, boy, there'd be some $10 and $20 million lawsuits that settle. I mean, that would be rendered. I mean, and that's the problem. I mean, the parents finally give up and say, okay, fine, I'll settle.
And the reason why is just so you guys know, another thing we're focusing on, when these families go through the initial discovery phase, when they're going through depositions, in a deposition, you can ask anybody anything. So these lawyers will put the parents on the stand and they make them relive the worst day of their life, losing a child, but then they somehow flip it on them and make them feel like it's their fault. And they ask them the most disgusting questions. I know one mother that was asked, isn't it true? Or when did you start birth control? Did you start birth control when you were 15? What that has to do with her son dying 15 years later is mind-boggling. But one sister was asked, and she was 15 at the time, isn't it true that your brother's dead because your parents were bad parents? And this is all mind-fucking on purpose, because what they do is they break you down, and then they know that if it goes to trial, it's only going to get worse. And then they're already traumatized. They're already going through this horrific thing. They just want to move on with their life. And the lawyers push them into, hey, let's just take the settlement. You can move on with your life. You'll be set for life. Just let it go. So no one's ever gone to trial. And I always tell families, don't listen to that gobbledygook. Like there's no way, and Dave will probably back me up on this. There's no, like in the Adam Oaks case, there's no way Delta Chi is going to allow that to go to trial. They are never going to go on the stand and have to defend how they operate and have to have all their internal operations be made public. They're never going to allow that to happen. They will write the biggest check known to man. It doesn't matter if they're saying right now, X number of dollars. If they go to trial and they have to let the world know what they know and how their internal organization works, it's going to blow them up. So they will never let that happen. But the parents are so destroyed, they take the settlements.
You know, the other worst thing, and, you know, along the same line that you're talking, and I remember the Birch case against Kappa Sigma was basically they sent investigators out to interview everybody the kid had gone to high school with, and they got down to junior high school, and they got down to every conceivable friend, and they got his driving record. They go after these kids as if they were they weren't the victims. They're the ones that caused their death, and it's just terrible. You know, it's nail the victim, and that's, you know, these lawyers have no principles. I mean, you know, I don't know how these people sleep at night.
So sorry, I'm going to get myself on there by myself. There we go. There are a couple other questions. Judy asks a lot of great questions, usually in a lot of these lessons. By the way, Dave, she is also a Michigan lawyer, just so you're aware. Yeah, she's up there too. But she asked you, well, you can read it. Do you think that the bus company should have a policy?
Well, I think they should, but I mean, basically every charter bus that they've got has drinking on it. So, I mean, you know, I get, you know,
they'll be out of business.
It's a business. I don't know how they're going to patrol it.
Here's what she said, in speaking of Michigan, and this was in Detroit apparently, was that they had one on a major freeway in Detroit, and due to drinking, the bus driver called the police and then wouldn't move.
Well, bless this.
So, I mean, good for them, I guess. But the questions, a lot of them about the bus driver, like, why did they allow drinking? Do rules not apply? I think we've kind of gone through a bunch of those things. So here's a question. This is not one that's asked. So you've been doing this for a while, and I know that Dan and I have talked about this kind of previously. To my knowledge, you know, whether it's Europe or Australia or anywhere else, to me, it doesn't seem that other countries have this obsession with Greek life that we do, that fraternities, even though they might be international.
Oh, the international fraternities are only because they have Canadian chapters.
Yeah.
They're not really international. It's, you know, they have Canadian chapters. They've had Canadian chapters since the early 1900s.
So there's not really any in Europe or Australia, then, it sounds like.
Well, there are chapters forming, and there, you know, problems with hazing and that sort of stuff. But I mean, it's basically been the last 15 or 20 years.
But they also
tried to do that.
American style hazing, this crazy show with like forcing people to chug a bottle of whiskey and waterboarding. It only happens here because universities overseas, especially in England, and they would never tolerate it. I mean, this is nuts. That's what I'm saying. If there was really truly a zero tolerance from the fraternities and from the university, shit would stop overnight. You know, that they took swift action on these kids. If they made it be known, if the police actually prosecuted these kids accordingly, this is manslaughter. This is not hazing. The fact that someone kills someone on a premeditated action, especially when they've been through hazing prevention training, they know that what they're doing can cause harm or kill someone, they still do it. And the fact they're not charged with manslaughter is just mind-boggling. They should all go down with manslaughter. Hazing should not even be a crime. Like, hazing shouldn't be a thing. We have something for accidental death. It's called manslaughter. And until kids are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, until we start holding the people at the top responsible for the infrastructure they created, nothing's ever going to stop. But if they really want it to stop, they can make that shit stop in a minute.
The only international hazing is the Philippines, and those are
that's more gang related, right?
What are there are not, they're not the same. They're not American.
Yeah, but that's like gang related, right?
Right.
Street gang. But it's big there.
Judy is interested that she's saying if they're self-insured, are they obligated to members for free existing drinking problems? I don't know. I remember getting more letters from mothers basically accusing me of turning their sons into alcoholic wastrels. And I think basically the fraternities look for people who like to party. So I think that they're turning people, they're looking for people they can turn into alcoholics, not vetting the ones that already are.
Yeah, because you know why? It's like I've had conversations with like Judd Horace and stuff, and I said, you know, everybody that you represent, he's the head of the NIC, guys.
He's
are the worst businessmen in the world, because if this was a business, I could argue with you that if you really get rid of hazing, your membership's going to go through the roof. Like right now, your entire business model is based on getting 20 to 30 new members per semester. if you got rid of the bullshit, you'd probably have hundreds of kids that would want to join per semester. Because kids today, especially the Gen Zers, they don't want to be tortured. They don't want to be, hazed or bullied. They just want to join an organization. There are a lot of kids. That's why the Abolish Greek Life movement at USC got so big, and that's why there were over 20,000 students that marched on Greek Row. Most of those kids actually weren't necessarily anti-Greek. Most of those kids were upset because they actually would have, when they went to USC, they were hoping to be part of something like that. But in lieu of what was going on, all the sexual assaults and the drug charges, they don't want anything to do with it, and they're upset. They're actually mad that the school's allowing this small group of kids to completely destroy, an opportunity that maybe they could have taken advantage of. There are a lot of kids that would like to join Greek life and be part of this, but they don't want this archaic way of looking at things. Something went awry, like in the late 90s, all the way up until recently, but it really started blowing up in 2007, 8, 9, where we started seeing extreme activities starting to happen where they're all trying to one-up each other. And it's not a coincidence that it happened when social media came into play, but and then they didn't do anything to control it, and now it's part of tradition, and they don't want to change things. And these guys are too stubborn to admit there's a problem, because maybe they're worried that if they do make a move to change things and they admit there's a problem publicly, that it could result in lawsuits from previous actions. I don't know. But for whatever reason, even though this stuff is right in their face, they see kids dying, they get sued, they read all the press, they all pretend like, oh, we don't know what's going on. We think, and they're like, we're doing everything we can. But, nothing against what some of the families are doing out there right now or anything. 100% of all the Hazing education, all the programs, everything focuses on the kids. It's all about the kids. And if you look at the defenses and all these lawsuits, they try to blame it on bad seeds. Well, when you run an organization, if you're just consistently attracting bad kids, well, maybe your system's fucked up and you need to fix that. And it's the people that are running it. It's not the kids, because like David, I came from this system, but more importantly, in the past 8 years since I've really been working in this field, I've interviewed dozens of fraternity boys, including dozens of kids who were found guilty of hazing that resulted in someone's death. I met a couple unlikable kids, but I have yet to meet a bad kid that intended to murder someone or intended for someone to die. So these are kids that are getting put in impossible situations. The adults know it's an impossible situation, and yet they still allow it to happen. And yet they don't get in trouble, and the kids do.
Well, I want to kind of address this comment right here and get y'all's opinion on it as well. But the sad truth is that we need to take personal responsibility, and we can't count on anyone but ourselves. It's a problem not with knowing our limits and thinking it's up to others to look out for us. And so here's kind of what I want to say about this. And then obviously y'all please, interject, and let's talk about Riley specifically in this situation, instead of even generically. When you look at fraternities and Greek life in general, because I was in it, y'all were in it, and we're talking about obviously different generations of it here as well. Drinking is beyond encouraged. I mean, the peer pressure of it is massive, and it's you're talking about people who don't know their limits, because if you're being legal, which is what we'll talk about here, we can assume that they probably didn't wait till they were 21, but let's just say that they did. Then you're well out of the house. And how else do you find your limits but by, experimenting with it? And typically when you're early 20s, late teens, early 20s, you're going to drink, and you're going to drink a lot, and your body's going to rebound. But when you're looking at these situations particularly, and you look at somebody like Riley, who's a senior, and it's been confirmed or, determined, I guess, not even confirmed, but determined he had between 12 and 15 drinks that night, which is why his BAC was as high as it was, and why he was where he was. There's peer pressure from that. And I think as an upperclassman too, you're like, well, let me show these younger kids, how it's done. And, so yes, I think there's absolutely some personal responsibility with Riley, but again, at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, hell, up to 25, your frontal cortex isn't fully developed, and you don't necessarily make the best decision. And so, when you have a fraternity, when you have what's supposed to be that brotherhood, you should have people looking out for you, because that's part of the reason why you joined that. And then on top of that, had it not been for that brotherhood, he wouldn't have necessarily been in that position that he was in the first place.
Well, the problem is that the only social life on campus is the fraternities, and the only, and the school claims, they're never going to be responsible. So, I mean, I don't know how you can take responsibility away from, I mean, it just, everybody that's going to school, everybody that's going to college has a fake ID, and everybody, they got it back when they were in high school. And the whole emphasis is on alcohol and getting away and doing the whole thing at college. And, I don't know the answer, I guess.
Well, I mean, a quick answer could be, like, that we all know that, right? Kids are coming into college with the mentality that they're going to drink. We all know they're going to drink, right? And we do know that, especially now, it's been made very public that fraternity structure as is in today's world, with how the mentality of kids and social media, that it's a recipe for disaster. And yet they haven't done really anything infrastructure wise to monitor more closely. I mean, look, you could just look at the sororities. Why don't they run fraternity houses more like sorority houses? The simple fact is the Nationals talk a big game, and they all say they want to create change and look what we're doing, this and that. But they know that everything that they're doing isn't working. It's the same old, same old. They bring parents in to talk to kids. They know it doesn't necessarily connect with the kids. And by the way, that's a whack-a-mole system. I'm leaning more towards, I'm starting to pull away from it. I'm very active in hazing prevention education. I believe in it, but I don't think that's going to fix the problem, because we have 11 million college kids out there today, and every 4 years we have a reset. So how the hell is that a sustainable model? How are we going to go out and educate and train all these kids every year when we could just go after a few hundred people who are in charge, hold them accountable, make them create a safer environment for our kids? When this is like the seatbelt law all over again. When they knew that people were dying from not having their seatbelts on for years, they tried to encourage people to put their seatbelts on. People just won't do what's right. Sometimes you have to force them to do what's right. You have to put them in a situation. It wasn't until the seatbelt law was made a law and we forced people to wear seatbelts did we see traffic, deaths go down. We have to put a situation together. We have to make it so we're forcing a safer environment, because you can't rely on a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old kids to make the right decision. So fraternities can fix this if they really want to fix it. They're not.
Amen.
Well, it seems to me that just a few great lawsuits, because again, like you said, this happens, a kid dies. You guys probably know the numbers. How many, you can pick whatever stats you want, but how many, deaths a year are we talking about from fraternity hazing?
Well, here's the backbone of my movie. I want to jump in on this. I don't want to let Dave here. Here's the real thing. We don't know. And the reason why is universities don't have to report that data. And a lot of times police aren't trained enough to know whether it was a hazing incident. Like, I'll give you a good example. The Adam Oaks case, had the detective not shown up, I mean, they compromised the whole scene. When you watch the body cam footage, they thought it was a kid that just drank too much at a party. They were walking over his body. They didn't treat it like a crime scene. It wasn't until the very end when they were getting ready to remove his body that someone said it could have been a hazing incident. And that was by accident. In fact, the Oaks today are trained in law enforcement right now in Virginia on how to recognize a hazing. But, the problem is that people aren't aware of, what hazing incidents look like. And the fraternities are very good at covering things up. But even then, when universities do know a hazing incident occurred, they're under no obligation under the Clery Act. The Clery Act is a law that was put into place to report campus crimes. And every quarter they have to put a public report out that shows all the crime committed on the campus, from murder to rape, even incest is on there, car robbery, car thefts, but they left hazing off of it. So a lot of the families right now are working to get a bill passed called the Stop Campus Hazing Act that would actually be an addendum to that bill that would make hazing a reportable crime. If that happens, we might have better data on how many people are dying a year. I mean, we used to average one a year, then it went up to 2 or 3. Fortunately, no one on record died of last year, but I don't believe that, because there are a lot of questionable cases where the parents are saying it was hazing, but unless the university comes forward and says it, these things usually get swept under the rug. And then the other thing that's interesting about this is 9 times out of 10, when there's a crime committed on a campus, the local city or government or local law enforcement or state police is not involved. At these bigger universities, they have their own police forces, and it's very easy for them just to chalk it off as like an alcohol-related death or an accident. They go out of their way not to label these as hazing incidents because they know it will look bad, and they also know that the fraternity will get attacked, and it all comes down to money. Someone said before, they love how blunt I am. It's all about money. At some universities, and Dave may have better stats with Deke especially, but we have data from a couple major universities that in excess of 80% of the active donors at those universities were Greek. So a university president is never going to do anything to harm their flow of cash. So they turn a blind eye. They put they label it as just accidental drinking or drug overdose, or he fell down the stairs, even though it could have been a hazing incident. And there's no one to check on any of that shit because they're not required by law to release any of it. And then lastly, the scariest thing of all, when there is a hazing related incident and it's still not reported, most of these cases are handled internally through like their own like weird internal courts where like the IFC is like, they govern themselves. So if a fraternity is guilty of hazing, they get brought up internally at the school, and they don't involve real police, and they go like through their own internal trial, and the school puts some sort of punishment on them, whether it's suspension or whatever. Again, none of that's made public, so we don't even know. So you're a parent, your kid's getting ready to go to whatever, UCLA, and Pike there had problems last year. No one would ever know because UCLA is not going to talk about it. Pike's not going to talk about it. And LAPD doesn't know shit about it because they were never informed because it was all they handled internally. And then they let fellow students determine what Pike's punishment should be. It's the biggest crock of shit I've ever seen in my life.
Well, it's also not just hazing. I mean, I'm dealing right now with 2 or 3 fights and 3 rapes. So, I mean, basically, these fraternity houses are little gang havens. I mean, basically they have these parties, and it's just utterly out of control. People are taking drugs, people are drinking alcohol to excess. It's there is no control, and the nationals are saying they can't control it because they haven't tried to control it, and they know they can. They can control this. They could stop this. They could, ban it effectively and be serious about it, but they're not going to do it.
So regarding all this new stuff, I'm right here.
Oh, no.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, see, this is why you can't make me a producer, Dan. I'm just kidding. You should definitely make me one. But anyway, regarding all the stuff that you reviewed on Riley Strain, since you did follow up from the beginning, what is this new information? What is this new information saying that the public should know? And what as an attorney, what would you do or advise the family? I guess knowing now what we know.
Well, I guess I learned today that the family is talking to Morgan & Morgan, and they'll probably handle the lawsuit. So, I mean, basically, I think the family is probably ready to sue, or will be ready to sue, and they'll be, it'll be, sort of you line up all these potential defendants, and one thing you learn as a lawyer, you sue everybody you can, and that's going to happen. And just wait for the lawsuit, I guess.
Do you obviously, we think they're going to probably go after the fraternity and members. Do you think that they're going to be going after, as far as Nashville entities, do you think that they're going to be involved or named in these suits also? I know this is all speculation and guessing. I'm just curious who they might have a case against.
I'm sure the bar will be named, but I mean, it'll probably settle out, and basically, and they never did figure out how he ended up in the river, and if that ever we'll find out if that's a criminal investigation or what that is at some point. But I don't think Nashville is that involved. It's going to be the kids, it's going to be the national fraternity, and it could very well be the University of Missouri.
Something that somebody said to me yesterday that I found kind of interesting is, with Riley Strain. I live in the Nashville area. So with Riley Strain, we get updates pretty, I would say fairly regularly, given how long it's been. When every time there's something new that comes out, and I know that WSMV, you might have been made aware of this also. They also got a hold of all the audio recordings and the interviews, so they're going through that now. And then there will be, another report that they do with that. But somebody had commented who lives in Columbia and Missouri, who goes to Mizzou, is like, ever since it happened, we haven't heard any updates here at all. It's been completely kept out of their press, but we're still hearing about it regularly, and he's not even from here.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons for that is
they sent me all that stuff, and basically it's you're going to hear a lot more. I mean, it's they've got the materials. Jeremy, what's it? Jeremy Finan, I believe, is the guy who's in charge of the investigate, and you're going to hear a lot more from him. I think he did the show 2 nights ago.
Why do you think that that we would be hearing about it more here than they're even hearing at Mizzou when it's a Missouri student? Well,
it was WSMB that did all the investigation and came up and it's gotten all the materials, and as they digest and analyze these materials, you're gonna hear from them, I'm sure.
Gotcha. I was just kind of curious because I know that when it came to the whole, when everything was happening initially, Nashville, I think it was Missouri. Who was it? I'm trying to think. Remember, it was Nashville or Missouri. One of them reached out to the other one, and the other one wasn't really interested in doing anything as far as interviewing the fraternity. Maybe it was Nashville to the Missouri. So, they weren't interested in hearing from the fraternity brothers or doing anything like that. It almost was like they wanted it swept under the rug. So I didn't know if perhaps it was something like where, what money talks, as Dan said, as you well know too. If it was just them trying to make it go away from that area, so it didn't look negatively upon the campus, upon the fraternity, etc. If that makes sense.
Well, I guess so. I mean, the thing
is,
maybe.
Okay.
You've got a pledge formal here. You've got the hotel. You've got. I mean, should they have rented this pledge formal in a foreign town to an out of state group of undergraduates? I mean, there's all kinds of legal potential things that you could think of if you really want to get into it. And so, we'll see what Morgan & Morgan comes up with, but I'm sure it'll be broad.
Here's a good question. Is the problem of hazing, this is for both of y'all, is the problem of hazing getting worse, or is it the fact that we have social media and it's out there more?
Well, I don't. What has been a surprise to me in the last 7 years as I've been handling these cases is the deposition to realize the incredible amount of hazing that's going on. And what they're doing is basically taking these kids and they're hazing them from the first day they get their bids. I mean, it's to the point where the kids are basically it's like when I went through basic training in the Army. They beat you down to accepting more and more and more of this stuff, and it's so much worse than it ever was that I was aware of.
Dan, do you have anything to add on that? Because you've done a lot of research on this as well.
I don't know if you can hear me, but my internet's going in and out.
We can hear you.
I think it's far worse because even if the rate of hazing is down, the action of what they're actually doing is, waterboarding, these dangerous activities of ingesting insane amounts of alcohol and drugs, jumping out of cars that are running down the highway. I mean, we're just seeing insane shit that we've never seen before. So I think it's a far worse problem today than it ever was. There's nothing getting better at all. There's not any data that anybody could show us that anything's improved at all in the past couple of years, other than, okay, last year we didn't have a documented death, but you can't gauge hazing and the problem of hazing based on how many kids die, because most kids that are being hazed in soccer in middle school don't die, but it's still a problem and it results in all sorts of problems for many, many years. It
isn't all hazing either. I mean, I've 2 cases where it was basically a fist fight, and people have brain injuries, for crying out loud. I mean, the behavior is so out of control in all these houses that it's out of control. It's sexual abuse. It's drug abuse. It's so far worse than anything I ever imagined.
for the fraternities and in Greek life in general, given the fact that, hazing is something that people, are aware of exists. They might not know how bad it was. I mean, again, I was in a fraternity, and until I met Dan, I didn't know how deep this rabbit hole went. And now I'm totally on his side. Like, let's expose this. Let's get things changed. But do you think that as far as Greek life goes, fraternities in particular, do you think that there's a decrease or an increase, as far as members go? Do you think that this amount of hazing and the fact that, like Dan said, Gen Z, Gen Z is pretty great about, like, we're not going to take shit from people. We're just going to, this is how we want to live. Is this impacting enrollment numbers, or are they still doing better than ever?
Oh, they're still doing better than ever. I mean, they don't have any problem getting members, and
membership's up.
Okay.
Membership is up shockingly.
So how do you change it? How do you impact when you have that, when the deck is stacked against, the individual and stacked in favor of the fraternities from a school perspective, from a political perspective? What tools do parents and individuals and even the students have in regard to this, other than not joining?
Well, I think that the individual not joining is the solution, but
keep
the
communication open with your kids.
The national leadership has to they have to take responsibility, and they have to shut it down, and they have to ban alcohol, and they have to take measures, and they have to turn these things into little dormitories, and they have to get like resident advisors in the dormitories. And I mean, they've just got to take control. I mean, the school can control the dormitories. There's no reason why the fraternities can't control these little living units that they've got.
They choose not to. I mean, it's basically, that's what it is. When we were at a house, on, so I don't know where it is now, because I think TEAC had gotten kicked off of Georgia Southern's camp. It was the Lambda Upsilon chapter had gotten kicked off for a bit, but our house at the time was off campus. They had a lot that they owned on Greek Row, but there was a whole thing about enrollment. They weren't, it's irrelevant. But it seemed to me that there was a little bit more rigidity when the house was for the fraternities and sororities that were on the official Greek Row versus those that were off campus. It seemed like it was basically just a free for all. There was no governing body. They could do essentially whatever they wanted, and they did. And with literally zero repercussions. And it just, given the fact that that's how it was, 20 years ago now, a little bit more than, and it's not improved, seems problematic. And I think that too, when you saw the article that came out with WSMV, they asked again, the head of Delta Chi for an interview, and he's not given an interview with any of this. And all he did was refer to the original statement that was posted after Riley had passed. And I'm going to just say this. I think that Dan and I need to take credit for that statement being made in the first place, because it was the day after you and I called them out on it. But they won't talk. It seems to me that none of these fraternities have any desire to make change. They want to leave it status quo, just the way it is. And, if people die, get injured, who cares?
Well, the problem is they claim that they are doing things, and they're not. And, it's this wonderful, we can't control the day-to-day operations of the chapters, is the ridiculous argument that they make. And that's just not true. And they just have to take responsibility. And the only way they're ever going to take responsibility is that, one of these lawsuits goes to a $50 million judgment, and the fraternity goes out of business.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Until someone gets walloped, you're never going to see a change. We need more Dave Easlicks. We need more people who are inside the system to come out and openly talk about it. I mean, for me, I was a member, so people could try to discredit me and say, well, I don't really know what goes on behind the scenes, but they can't say that to Dave.
Unfortunately, I'm the only guy as a witness who has ever run a fraternity, and I ran a fraternity for 29 years, and I understand how it works, and I was there for all the risk management stuff, and I know the bullshit that's going on. But I've got a huge, as Doug Fierberg, who's a lawyer that handles a lot of these cases, said, you've got a great big bullseye on your back, and they're after you, and they are. I mean, the fraternity, the fraternities don't like me very much.
I would imagine not.
Yeah, same with me.
So,
I mean, it'd be fun for us to do an episode with you, Justin, from the lobby at the NIC conference with me and Dave. I mean, and more people would stop and double look if they saw David at the bar at a conference.
hey, you know what? I would go. We could live stream that whole thing. You just tell me when and where. So parents can understand, who have kids that are getting ready to go to college or thinking about joining Greek life or in the next few years, because we kind of touched on it. And Dan, I know that you and I have talked about this in past with Eric Oakes a little bit, but a situation like Riley Strain happens, a situation like, Adam Oakes happens. Just to enlighten people, what is the fraternity's protocol that they require when an event like this occurs, a major event like a death? What do they do? What are they told to do?
They're told to shut up. They're told to not contact the parents. They're told to contact the national immediately. They're told to contact the insurance company. There's a line for an investigator, and they are told to gather the group and tell them all that they have no comment, and there will be no comment made by any member of the fraternity. And that's the standard crisis management procedure that was implemented by the insurance company, and every one of them has it.
There's a saying, Justin, that's why my film's called Protect the House. You always have to protect the house. So your loyalty needs to be to the fraternity, not to the well-being of whatever member. Could be like in the Riley case, they had a member who was missing. Rather than look for him, they immediately went into let's protect Delta Chi mode, not try to find Riley. And that's why I was very vocal and I was calling the fraternity out, and I turned out to be right.
It just seems to me. It just seems to me, and the point that I also want to kind of drive home for people listening is that, they sell you on the concept of brotherhood, that these are your brothers. They're going to be there for you until the minute that something goes wrong. And instead of being there, they move to protect a non-tangible entity, basically, over the value of somebody who's supposed to be their brother. And not that it would make it better. Adam Oakes was pledging, right? That was his first night as a pledge. Not that this makes it better, because his life was incredibly valuable. But with a fraternity, you have somebody like Riley Strain, who was a senior. Now, I don't know if he joined when he was a freshman or not, but let's assume that he probably did. So now you're talking about an upperclassman who'd been going to school with these guys for 4 or 5 years. And the minute he's missing, they throw him out like trash. That to me does not constitute brotherhood.
Yep.
No, that's absolutely
right.
Don't
give a shit if you're the president of the fraternity or a fucking pledge.
And we need to educate that to the undergraduates, saying you think the brotherhood is behind you. Look at the examples.
Yeah, and like I said at the beginning of this is, for me personally, I'll share this. It wasn't anything hazing related, but I felt very much. So my father was footing the bill at the time for me being in a fraternity, and for somebody asking, why do people want to do this? Why would they want to fit in and stand out? Sometimes it's more than that. For me personally, I took a year off after high school. And for me, high school wasn't, the most fun times. And so I started at Georgia Southern. I didn't know anybody. And so, this was in the early days of the internet and AIM. And I met, was talking in a chat room at the, about the school. And somebody's like, oh, I have some friends, these guys that, and that's how I got hooked up with the fraternity. That's how I joined. But my dad was very good at paying the dues on time. And having been in the fraternity, one thing that I had noticed that there were a lot of guys who weren't good at paying their dues on time, and they would let them slide a little bit longer, meaning those that did give money on time became, got the pressure to do so. Well, it was after I had already been initiated. I think I was in for about 1.5 years at that point. And and I had thought about quitting at one point when I was a pledge. And ultimately, I'm the one that talked myself out of that. But this other guy, he was having such a hard time with the hazing that he was going to quit. And the brothers got wind of that. The leadership got wind of that, and they called every one of the members up. You all have to be here. We're going to his apartment. We're going to, show him what brotherhood is. And I'm standing there. I remember sitting there in the room. And that's when I made the decision that I'm leaving this group, because they would have never done something like that for me. This was a guy that they wanted there because they enjoyed him. But my point is that, for none of them, it really isn't, I never felt that bond of brotherhood that was there. It was just a selling point that they try to give you, but execute poorly, so, and I think when you look at what happens, the minute somebody's missing, again, you have, David, I don't know if you have children. I know that Dan does. I know that I do. But as a parent, if my child's missing, I don't want that kept from me. I want to know immediately, because every minute counts in that type of a situation.
Absolutely.
So that's just my 2 cents on it. What else haven't we talked about that you think that we should, gentlemen?
I don't know. I think we've done a pretty thorough job of it.
I feel so too. In an hour and a half, we did pretty good.
I think, people just need to know these are glorified party places. They're drinking clubs. This isn't a brotherhood and, lifelong friends. And, and if your lifelong friendships are based on, buying your friends, then I guess you could say they're lifelong friends. But I just, the meaning of fraternities and what this system was based on is drastically different today than it was. And so you just have to go in with your eyes wide open. I mean, if your son has joined one of these organizations already, you guys got to keep that relationship alive, and they have to, hopefully they're honest with you. Because I can put you in touch with a lot of great parents who lost their kids. They were terribly close to their kids. They're all good boys. They were all very responsible kids, and they knew better. And a lot of them were not easy kids to be victims of bullying, and somehow they still succumb to it. So don't think, well, my son's strong. He knows what he's doing. And, he's strong and this will never happen to him, because I'm sure every parent out there who lost their son would say the same thing. I thought for sure, my son would never do something like this. And then the bigger issue is, a more terrifying thing is, and I hate to break this to, parents, I say it to all the parents I work with now, well, my son would have been a leader different. You know what? I tell a lot of parents, the unfortunate thing is, if had your son not died and made it through, he would have been part of the problem. And it happened to me. I mean, I hazed people and I was hazed. I mean, granted, we didn't do what they're doing now, but they're so good at convincing people that this isn't wrong. And since you went through it, they should go through it. They look at it in a really twisted way. So yes, if your son's in a fraternity today, I can guarantee you he's hazing people. He went through it. So don't say, well, my son would never do that. My son's fraternity doesn't haze. I can guarantee you your son is participating in hazing. They all do it.
No, and the thing is that once you've been hazed, you want to do at least the same thing to the next group. I mean, it's, okay, boy, hey, we did this, and let's just give it a little extra twist here. And, it's diabolic, but I mean, it does go all the way to the top, and the Nationals do know that. And they're not doing a damn thing. I mean, they have all these groups, and, they're lobbying this and lobbying that, and they're trying to say that hazing, extends back to high school and college teams and all that kind of stuff. But hazing goes back to the origin of a fraternity. There's always been hazing in the fraternity system. And, let's deal with the fraternity system, which is where the problem is. And let's not sit here and make it, the broadest possible group of people that includes everything other than fraternities, because the issue is something we can control, and the national is the problem.
Here's a good question, David, that somebody asked. I mean, I feel like this would be good for you because you did this for 20, you were over one for 20 years. What would happen if they decided to go against protocol and did call the parents and did speak out? What would that, what would happen?
Their lawyers are afraid that that's going to admit liability, and they're going to be in a problem. I mean, that's why the crisis management is that way. With the insurance company mandates the thing, and it's just basically they're afraid of what they're going to tell the parents, and the kids are going to admit to the parents that whatever they did.
But would there be any repercussions?
But they would either get thrown out. Yeah, 100%. They would be thrown out for some bullshit reason, or if they were an employee of the organization, they would be terminated for some bullshit reason. They would never say why they're doing it, but there's no way if someone's speaking, they would let them stay in.
It seems like if something like this happened, they wouldn't want to stay in, like the Riley strain. That's just kind of what
look, I've met with some kids that are active, that really like their fraternity and are just very sad they want it to stop. They've asked me for advice to how do I stand up to the upperclassmen, because they went through it, they're in, and they want to end. And they, so there are good kids out there that want to help fix this. And it's a horrible position to be in, because you struggle with the fact, do I give up my social life? Because then you become an outcast on the campus. That's the other thing. If you're in a big fraternity and you quit, I don't know if this happened to you, Justin, but some schools, it's fucking terrifying. They could completely destroy your social life.
Well,
if you talk out against them, or you just leave, you try to leave the club, good luck.
Well, fortunately,
especially if you're at a school like Clemson or something like that, have fun.
Well, fortunately for me at Georgia Southern, the fraternities had their thing, but when I left, I was never felt like, no, you're still here. You're still here. But I never felt like an outcast after I left. And we can hear you, Dan. We can hear you if you can hear us. I think he's having issues. But I guess what's hard for me to kind of understand, and I'm looking at it partially from my own personal views, which I can't look at it that way. But I saw something with my fraternity, like, hey, they wouldn't have done this for me. This doesn't feel like brotherhood, and I left. If I were these guys at Delta Chi, at Virginia or even this one, and I said, hey, saw what happened to Adam Oaks and them clam up and family, my parents, see these parents looking for answers, or, again, same thing with Riley Strain, where they clam up, parents don't have any answers. And this, this kid's dead. He's missing. He turns up dead. They find him, and they had all left. I'm sitting there, even in my early 20s, thinking like, well, if I go in one of these events and I go missing, this is what they're going to do. They're not going to, like, why would you want to still stay a part of that at that point in time? Like, that's where it's hard for me to comprehend.
They're not thinking of that terms. They're thinking of the fun and games and the next party that they go to and the next weekend. And they're not, the thing is, I was once, a fellow who was a Dartmouth Deke once said to me, he said, the greatest thing about the parties at the Deke house is you can't remember a thing, the next day. And that's basically what these kids are doing now. They're going and they're overwhelming the physical space of the house. They're sitting there running around, just absolutely drinking and drugging and whatever. And this is insane, and it's got to stop.
Yeah, I agree. It's very disheartening. It's just, you got to get, it's hard to get them to see it, because like you said, they're looking for that next party. They're looking for, the good time, and like, oh, well, I guess if I, it's not going to happen to me, because when you're that age, you're immortal anyways, at least so you think.
Well, you're not going to think that they're like the Grubers or something who are going to end up losing their son, because it's just, because it happens it happens 5 or 6 times a year. Okay, great. Well, that's 5 or 6 times a year, and there are thousands of fraternity houses. I mean, yeah, the odds are it's not going to happen to them.
Yeah, but that's just the death side of it. So, but all the other things, like the Danny Santullis of the world, and the Tyler Perinos, people who have been hazed that it really affected their lives in a really horrific way. We probably can't count all those people, and there's probably tons and tons that we're not even aware of.
And how many people are you turning into alcoholics? That's another thing.
Yeah, 100%. And so, it's a much bigger issue. Dave, I'd like to hear that. I never asked you about this. So, when I interviewed Brian Warren from SIGEP, I do believe Brian is trying very hard. But Brian said the biggest challenge
No, we did lose you for a minute.
He can't fix this unless the alumni without the alumni on board. This is a dead end street. When you were at Deke, if you wanted to create change, if you want to put things in motion and really affect change, do you think you could have gotten the alumni behind it?
Well, I did put things in motion to create change, because we got
heard that.
We got nailed with $1 million lawsuit.
You guys are frozen on my screen.
And basically what happened was I found myself without a job a month or 2 later.
I think Dan might be frozen a little bit, because I think he's having internet issues, but interesting.
Basically, I was retaliated against. I mean, I basically did what I could to prevent hazing and to deal with a situation where we had a suicide where we got nailed for $1 million lawsuit. And I, basically knew we had to stop it, or we would not exist anymore. And the things I did to try to stop it were the reason that I was fired. That
seems so counterintuitive.
That's what's going on. I mean, you look at any one of those fraternities. That's the mindset.
Well, I hope that people will take, note of this stuff. And I hope that Gen Z does, decide to take less of this, this type of, tolerate this type of behavior. But, I agree, until some of these stories like Adam's story and the Deverselli story and all of these kind of things keep coming out, it's not going to change.
I think one of the frats is hacking this because you guys are frozen. Someone's trying to stop us from talking.
It's interesting because we can see him without a problem, and he's not. You're not frozen at all. And
I don't know, but you guys are frozen. I just heard you.
No, it's probably your fault then. Well, regardless, I appreciate the time, and Dave, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this, and you as well, Dan. You guys are both a wealth of knowledge, and I know this is a really kind of rare opportunity.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Justin, because it's rare that I get an opportunity to actually express my thoughts on this matter.
Well, it looks like the Riley strain. There's a lot of optics on that case, and I think that there's been a lot of frustration, with the fraternity brothers, and I think that it's continuing to bring it more to light, and even every time there is a Riley strain update, I think is another opportunity to really kind of point this type of mentality and this type of behavior out, because at that moment you have the attention of those people. Like we've had several hundred people, in here. It'll continue to be watched, and we'll pull some stuff out for TikTok, but it's a way to educate people and parents in a way that the fraternity won't. And for somebody like you, especially, who has experience with both sides of it, from being on the fraternity and side, and now being on the legal side, I think that you really bring a lot of great information that parents wouldn't have otherwise.
Well, thanks.
Well, I don't know what happened to Dan, but we'll go ahead and now. Thanks for coming on, and I hope that as we get more information, you'd consider coming back.
Okay.
All right. Bye, everyone.
I'm still here. I'm trying a place where I could talk. The internet keeps going in and out.
Oh, did you want to say anything before we signed off?
I'm in the middle of a farm in Tennessee. No. I just want to thank Dave for coming on. I mean, Dave is the one person that it's very hard to attack, and again, he was in the inner circle. So
he froze again. While we're
director
waiting,
and an ex-frat guy, but to come out and be a whistleblower and raise attention is a big deal.
I do want to show y'all something real quick before we go, because sometimes you don't know if your efforts make a difference. But you always say if you can reach one person, well, there you go. There's your one person.
Great. Congratulations, Diana.
So it does make a difference, and that's just one person who spoke up on it. So anyways, gentlemen, I appreciate it, of course. And we'll do this again when there's more information out there.
Great.
All right. Bye, everyone.